Morning. Thank you, everyone, for showing up today to worship God. Jack, thank you for that scripture reading that you gave us. Recently, I watched a documentary on somebody that most of you probably know. It's a guy named Lance Armstrong, and Lance Armstrong was one of the most. He has quite an interesting story. In the 1990s, Lance Armstrong grew up in Texas. He was a promising young world-class cyclist, and at the age of 25, he was diagnosed with advanced testicular cancer, which, as you might imagine, was quite a shock to him. And by the time they caught it and tested him for it, it had spread throughout his body, and his chances for survival were not really good at all. But yet somehow he was able to become cancer free. He had chemotherapy, and it was just this inspirational story for people all over the world that saw this happen. And from there, not only did he recover from cancer, but he entered the Tour de France. And for those of you that don't know, and I didn't know this much about it, I just started researching it a little bit. The Tour de France is arguably the hardest physical athletic competition on the planet. It consists of 21 days of bike riding. It's over 2,000 miles of racing through France, in the mountains, speeds 60 miles per hour, down hills, down mountains, crashes, sickness, all kinds of bad things that can happen. And Lance Armstrong entered the Tour de France and he won. So here you have this guy who beats cancer and comes back and wins the Tour de France. He starts the Live Strong Foundation, which is a foundation that did all kinds of good for cancer through people with cancer throughout the world. Lance Armstrong became a national hero. People loved this guy. He achieved the kind of celebrity status where, from what I saw, he could pick up and pretty much call anyone in the world. He went on to win 7 Tour de France championships. And but while this was going on, there were people that suspected that he was using performance enhancing drugs. Well, he was able to retire and get out of it before that was ever proven that he was. However, one of his former teammates ends up winning the Tour de France and is found to have been using performance enhancing drugs and ends up telling on Lance Armstrong. So Lance Armstrong gets caught. He admits to it, and it was devastating to some people. People had this guy on the highest of high pedestals, and people were devastated. Some people just hated him for it. And so you had this man who has this epic fall from grace based on some of the choices that he made and the way things played out. Well, one of the most famous stories of a fall from grace was just read to you by Jack, and that's the story of Adam and Eve. And while they're both interesting stories, what is it that we can learn from bad decisions that other people have made to help us be able to walk with God and do what's right? Well, there's a lot of things. One of the things, though, that I want to talk about is accountability. Okay, most of us are leaders, and some of you kids might be like, "Well, I'm not a leader. What are you talking about?" Well, you can be a 5-year-old, and you can have your 3-year-old brother that's looking up to you to see what you do, and you have influence on him. You have influence on all kinds of different people. So we're all leaders, and to be a good leader, you need to be accountable. Now, if you look at Genesis 3:12, which was the last verse that Jack read, it says, "The man said, 'The woman who you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree and I ate.'" Okay. Husbands, we have to be accountable for our own actions. We are called to be leaders of our families. We need to take accountability and we need to do what's right. What this kind of sounds like is, well, yeah, God, I mean, I did it, but that woman that you gave me, she talked me into it. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. And that's not the way things need to be. We need to be accountable for our own actions, because what do we tell our kids? We tell our kids, hey, you're going to get in more trouble for lying about it than for the thing that you did that was wrong. But if we're not modeling that kind of behavior, if we're not taking accountability for our own actions, then why would they do what we're trying to encourage them to do? If we're messing up, but we don't acknowledge it, if we do something wrong, if we mess up in our own families and we don't say, I'm sorry, why are they going to take what we have to say seriously? If we're at work and we make a bad choice and we make a bad decision that wrongs someone else, and we don't say, hey, you know what, that was my fault, that one's on me, then why would anybody follow us? And for us to have the kind of credibility, for us to have the kind of influence that we want to be able to have on our families and those that we might have be able to be a positive influence for Christ for, we need to do what we need to do to have accountability. We need to be accountable so that we can have that type of influence that we want to have on them. Another thing that we can take from this is we need to have faith. In 1 Corinthians 16:13, it says, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. You know, sometimes we don't always understand why decisions are made. Sometimes we might be at work or we might be looking at national level politics and we might think like, well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why are we doing that? And I've been there. And sometimes decisions are made that I don't always agree with. But like for example, at work, what I try to tell myself is that sometimes some of these decisions are made and they don't make sense to me, but I trust the guy that's made this decision and he has a perspective and he might have information that I don't have. So I need to give him the benefit of the doubt and accept it and move on. Now, sometimes they probably didn't make the best decision, but the difference is with God, we have to have faith that he is going to make that right decision, that he does have a perspective and he does know more than we do. And so that when he makes that decision, when he tells us that we need to do certain things, we need to trust in him enough to do that. When Abraham was ready to offer up his firstborn son Isaac, he did not understand why he needed to do this, but he was ready to do it nonetheless. So we have to have faith. We have to know our place. We have to know that we don't know all that there is to know, and that God is in control and he is wise, and we need to trust in him and lean on his understanding to guide us in the right directions. Proverbs 3:5 tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So we need to keep that in mind. Another thing that's tied in with faith, I think, is patience. Uh, Romans 12:12 tells us, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. Now, we live in this society anymore where we don't always have to exercise that much patience. We have all this stuff just at our fingertips. We want to know about something, we just whip out our phone and there it spits out an answer for us right there. If we want something, we get on our phone, boom, Crumble Cookies delivered to our house, Amazon delivered to our house. Whatever we want, Grubhub, it's coming right to our house and we don't really have to wait that much. The problem is, though, I think, is that sometimes is that with all these conveniences that we have, we don't always we don't always we're not able to apply delayed gratification. And what that means is that we get so used to having what we want when we want it that we're not able to look at the bigger picture and put off some of these short-term decisions for our good later on down the road. And we have to be able to do that. When God tells us not to do certain things, it might be enjoyable to do in that moment, but in the grand scheme of things, we'd have been better off not doing it. So that we need to wait for that. We need to be patient. We need to be patient with um, God's advice and God's guidance, because it's going to work out for us better. We have to be patient with the people that we we have to have patience with people we come in contact with. We have to be patient with our family members. And, you know, I think sometimes one of the things that happens is that people that we're close with, sometimes they get the worst of us. And what I mean by that is you go off to work and maybe you're in a profession like, and it could be any number of professions, but maybe you're in a profession where you're dealing with people that are challenging on a daily basis. Maybe you're in law enforcement. Maybe you're a teacher. Maybe you're in customer service of some sort. And we're able to go there and we're able to deal with people that are having a hard time, people that are not always respectful, people that are not nice, people that are insulting us. And we're able to put on this game face and be professional. And we do that all day long. And then we come home and we don't have a whole lot of patience left anymore because we've been fighting it all day. And then we come home and then one of the kids leaves the milk out on the counter, or maybe something doesn't get made for dinner, or something that is really not that big of a deal. And we don't have the patience for it, and we blow up and we yell at our kids, we yell at our wife, we don't act the way we should be acting. And all that stuff I said about being at work, it doesn't excuse any of the behavior that follows, right? It's not a good excuse. It's not a valid excuse. Now, is it good for us to understand maybe why we get the way we are sometimes? Yeah, it is good to understand that, but it doesn't give us a pass and it doesn't make it okay. So we have to be patient. We have to do whatever it is we need to do. If we need to drive around the block a few times before we walk in the front door to try to decompress a little bit, do that. But we got to be patient, especially with people that mean the most to us, really, because they're very important, and we don't want to alienate them, and we want to do what's right by them, and we have to be accountable because sometimes when we do mess up, we have to say, "Hey, son, hey, babe, hey, whatever, I messed up, and I'm sorry. I'm going to do better." And we just have to swallow our pride sometimes and acknowledge when we do wrong. Another point that I want to make is that sin has consequences. If you look at the story that Jack read about Adam and Eve, you'll find in there that what does God tell Eve? I'm going to multiply your pains in childbirth. God kicks Adam out of the Garden of Eden. They had this life where they had everything that they needed, and now things have changed. Actions have consequences. Now, we don't really hear a whole lot about Adam and Eve after this, and I'm not saying that God didn't forgive them for that. God's certainly capable of doing that. But the point is that your actions have consequences. Our actions have consequences. If somebody goes out and gets drunk and they get behind the wheel of a car and they injure someone severely or they kill someone, would God forgive them of that? Absolutely, He would forgive them of that. But there's still consequences. That doesn't heal that person and get them back to the health that they had before that accident. That doesn't bring somebody back from the dead. That doesn't heal all the pain that that person's family has to now experience. That doesn't keep you out of jail. That doesn't pay all the fines that you had to pay. There's still consequences. If you're engaged in some inappropriate activity, you might end up with an unwanted pregnancy. You might end up with a disease. You might end up with all these things that, even though God's willing to forgive you for the behavior, there's still consequences to deal with. If you are abusing drugs, God can forgive you for that, but it might not put your brain back to the status that it was before. So there are consequences for our actions, and we have to keep that in mind, which ties right back into what we talked about earlier about having faith in God and trusting in Him and doing His will because it is for our greater good down the road. Now, what can we do to try to keep us from one of these falls from grace like this? There's a lot of things, but one, we can study. If we have a test that we're getting ready for, and we study that subject, world history, physics, whatever, and when that test comes around, if we've done a good job studying, hopefully that translates right back out onto our test so that we can do well on it. Now, we're going to be tested out in the world all the time, and if we have that good positive information coming in from the Bible guiding us on how we should act, it's going to be right there at the forefront of our minds and in our thoughts so that we can deal with these challenges that we face out there. We need to pray. We need to be asking for God, talking to Him sincerely about our lives and asking for forgiveness and guidance in the things that we do. That's also going to help us with challenges that we face. Another one is the company that we keep. If we're hanging around with the right kind of people, that is going to make our lives so much easier and so much better. I think sometimes what happens to us is that we might find ourselves in situations, whether it be at work or school or whatever, and we befriend people, and we think, hey, this guy's okay. He's a good guy. I like him. He's a nice guy. He's not a bad person. But they're engaging in some behavior. They're engaging in some things that we think are wrong, or maybe they're kind of borderline. And as time goes by and we get to know these people a little bit, and it becomes more normal, we start to kind of become where we're building a tolerance for it. And we start to think, yeah, it's not really that bad. And if we're not careful, we can slip into doing some of these things that we don't want to do. And if we surround ourselves with the right kind of people, it can make things so much better and help us to from yielding to temptation. A lot of the kids went down a couple of weeks ago to this youth event that they had at Davis Park, and they had people from all over the valley, kids from all over the valley at it. And I think sometimes our kids, when you go to the Church of Christ, you start to think, oh, you know what? There's nobody really around like us. I'm not really the only one. And you kind of feel like you're by yourself sometimes. But when you go to these things and you see that, hey, you know what? There really are other people out there that are like you and that believe like you do. And so I think it's such a positive for not only our kids, but all of us to have friends and associates that are people that have similar beliefs to us, because it's going to be beneficial to us and help keep us on the right track. And then the last thing I'm going to mention, as far as helping us keep from sin, is sometimes one of the best things that we can do is just to remove the temptation or to remove ourselves from the temptation. Now, if let's say I'm trying to lose 10 pounds in the next 4 weeks, and I know that I've got this extreme weakness for double chunk chocolate cookies and chicken bakes. I probably need to leave those down at Costco. I don't need to be bringing them to my house, because I know that if those are sitting there on the counter or in the refrigerator, when I walk by them, I know that it's in there. And it's real easy for me to just reach over and pinch some of that off and pop it in my mouth. And before you know it, I've eaten all of it and it's gone, and I blew my whole diet. Okay, so I'm better off leaving that down at the store, because it's a whole lot more trouble for me to have to get in the car and think about going to do something I don't want to do and driving all the way down there. I'm a lot more likely to succeed than if I have it right there in the kitchen calling my name all the time. Now, it's the same thing. If you know that you have problems with a certain behavior, if you are going to be tempted to drink, you probably should stay out of certain situations. If you're going to be tempted to use bad language around your friends, well, maybe you should not be hanging around with those people as much. Whatever it is that you have, whatever weakness that you have, if you can remove that from your from your from your surroundings, it can make it so much easier for you to not fall into that type of behavior that we want to try to stay out of. So anyway, there was a lot here to think about with these two stories. People fall from grace all the time, and they talk about history. The thing about history, what do they say? We need to know our history so we don't repeat it. We can see how people get themselves in trouble. And we also can see how we can take certain steps to stay out of that trouble. So the good news though is that, well, bad news and good news. Bad news is we're going to mess up, and we all know that already. There's going to be some consequences sometimes for our actions that we just have to deal with, because none of us are perfect, and we're not all going to make the right decisions all the time. The good news is though is that Jesus' blood will wash those sins away, um, that we have committed, and we can still be saved and and go to heaven. So if there's anybody here today that feels that they need forgiveness of their sins, if they need to have it, if they have any requests that they'd like to make publicly, or they want to be baptized, we are offering an invitation for you to come forward at this time and ask for that as we sing the song of invitation.